Robert Frost is arguably the most highly awarded poet in American literary history. He won prize after prize, medal after medal, and perhaps the only prize which eluded him was the Nobel Prize for Literature. Though he was nominated repeatedly for the Nobel Prize for Literature, he was not actually awarded the same. But Frost more than made up for this failure by winning practically every single honor that could be won by an American poet of his day. There is no doubt that Frost is a great poet. And the greatness of Frost as a poet is based on his extraordinary capacity to amalgamate complex philosophical profundity and fluent conversational simplicity. Robert Frost famously observed that a poem should begin in delight and end in wisdom. It is this remarkable integration of wisdom and delight that makes the poetry of Frost not just great but also unique. Fire and Ice is one of the most popular poems of one of the most popular poets of the world. It is a short poem, it's a small poem, it's a compact poem, it's a profound poem, it's a gem of a poem. Scrutinize the title of the poem, Fire and Ice. The poet makes use of two very ordinary words to craft the title of the poem. Fire and ice. Words which very frequently occur in everyday talk, in everyday conversation. Words which we use casually without thinking. Words which are very much part of the basic vocabulary of the English language. But there is more to it than meets the eye. The fire in the poem is not just fire. The ice in the poem is not just ice. The fire in the poem, the ice in the poem, of course, they are fire and ice in a literal sense on one level. Fire is, of course, a state of burning, the process by which certain chemicals combine with oxygen in the air to generate light, heat, and sometimes smoke as well. Ice is frozen water frequently transparent, crystalline, hard. But as I said, the fire and the eyes are not fire and eyes in a literal sense alone. They are striking images, evocative images, which leave an indelible mark on the mind of the reader. They are richly allusive terms, indirectly referring to numerous great passages in Western literature, including passages from William Shakespeare and Dante Alighieri. Above all, they are symbols. The fire is a symbol, the eyes is a symbol of great profundity, of great depth, of great complexity. Symbols which are capable of opening an entire universe of symbolism. What the fire stands for, what the eye stands for in the poem, we shall investigate as the class progresses. Some say the world will end in fire, the end of the world. Almost all religions prophesy the end of the world. The prediction that the world will end is universal or near universal. Christianity speaks of the end of the world. Islam does the same. In Hindu mythological thinking, we have the end of one yuga and the beginning of the next yuga, which is, in practical terms, the end of the world and the beginning of a new world. The end of the world trope is universal. It is present in all civilizations, in all societies, cultures, mythologies. The only question is, how will the world end? Some say the world will end in fire. The poet says that there are some people who believe that the world will end in fire as a result of being burnt to ash. Fire, as I said, is a state of burning. It is a process by which certain chemicals combine with oxygen in the air to generate light, heat, and perhaps also smoke. There are some who hold that, who believe that the world will be burnt to ash and thus the world will come to an end. Some say in eyes. Some hold that the world will come to an end in eyes. The poet's point is that there is no dispute over whether the world will end or not. The only difference of opinion is regarding the way in which the world will end. Some say in ice. Ice, as I said, is frozen water. It is transparent, it is crystalline, it is hard. There are some who hold that, who believe that the world will come to an end through freezing. The entire world, the earth will be covered with ice and all of us will be frozen to death, and the world will come to an end as a result of freezing, as a result of ice. From what I have tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. The poet says that he agrees with those who believe that the world will end in fire. Why does he agree with them? Because he knows what desire is. From what I've tasted of desire. Thus the poet makes it clear that the fire that will engulf this world, the fire that will put an end to this world, is no ordinary fire, is no literal fire. From what I've tasted of desire, the world will be annihilated by the fire of desire. The poet knows enough about desire to realize that those who believe that the world will perish in fire are correct. Thus, the poet makes the fire in the poem a symbol for desire. Desire is a strong feeling that you want something. The Buddha said, desire is the root of all evil. Desire is the root of all evil. Desire, avarice, covetousness, greed, nothing more is needed to destroy not just an individual, not just a society, not just a civilization, but the entire world. That is why the Buddha said that dukkha nirodha is possible only by putting an end to desire. This is a richly elusive area of the poem where indirect references are established with numerous passages in the religious literature of the world which say that desire basically is evil. It has to be pointed out that greed is one of the 7 deadly sins according to Christianity. And if I remember correctly, the classification originated from the works of the desert fathers, the early Christian monks who withdrew to the deserts of Egypt, to the deserts of the Middle East, to practice Christian monasticism. From what I've tasted of desire has to be explained. Is it the desire of the speaker himself, or the desire of other people. This depends on how you interpret the meaning of the word taste. Taste can mean experience something oneself. He tasted defeat for the first time in his life. Experience something oneself, especially for a short period of time. If that is the meaning that we read for the word, for the verb taste, then the desire is the desire of the speaker himself. But taste can also mean ascertain the flavor of something or understand the feelings of others. He entered the room and immediately he could taste the fear palpable there. If this is how we interpret the verb taste, then the desire is the desire of others, not the desire of the speaker. So whether it is the desire of the speaker or the desire of others depends on how we interpret the term, the verb taste. But if it had to perish twice, the poet is certain that the first possible cause of the annihilation of the world is fire. The fire of avarice, the fire of greed, the fire of covetousness, put very simply, the fire of desire. But if it had to perish twice, let us, for the sake of argument, accept that the world has to be destroyed a second time. If it had to perish twice, perish means be destroyed completely. I think I know enough of hate. Hate is here used as a noun to mean hatred, to mean an intense feeling of dislike, a violent attitude of dislike. To say that for destruction eyes is also great and would suffice. I thought when I read the poem for the first time as a schoolboy, as a child, that the poet was having the Ice Age in mind when he wrote these beautiful lines. Perhaps he was having the Ice Age in mind. And the Ice Age is a long period of glacial expansion when substantial parts of the earth came to be covered with ice sheets, when there was dramatic glacial expansion, and when the temperatures of the earth fell very significantly. Perhaps the poet has the Ice Age in mind, but it is clear that the ice that we meet with in this poem is no mere ice on a literal plane, on a basic plane. It could be ice, frozen water, transparent, hard. But on another plane, on a higher plane, the ice symbolizes hate, hatred, an intense feeling of dislike, a violent attitude of dislike. And the poet feels that hatred is as capable of annihilating the world as desire is capable. So the poet has now identified the two fundamental possible causes for the end of the world. The first is fire, the second is ice. The first is desire, the second is hate. And the poet wraps up the poem by admitting that ice would very much suffice, that ice would be enough, that hate would be enough to destroy the world. Ice is great for destruction, as great as fire, and would certainly be as sufficient as fire for the cause of the annihilation, for the cause of the complete destruction of the world. It is not merely the hate that an individual feels for other individuals that the poet seems to be having in mind. Rather, it is the hate of groups for other groups. The hate of a group, the hatred that a group feels for other groups. Karl Marx speaks of class war, one class fighting a war against another class. There have been religious wars, people divided on the basis of religion and fighting brutally on that basis. You have the Crusades, the efforts to retrieve the Holy Lands from the control of the Muslims. You have the hate that nations feel for other nations. One nation feels hatred for another nation. So I think that the poet is quite justified in believing that hate could very well be the cause of the end of the world. The poet's contention is that fire and ice, desire and hate are the two possible causes for the catastrophic conclusion of the world. They are both competent of causing the catastrophic end of the world. I like to tell my students that Fire and Ice is a gem of a poem. One of the reasons why it's a gem of a poem is its rich elusiveness. The poem, short though it is a fantastic tapestry of illusions. The rich and dense elusiveness of the poem demands an independent class lasting several hours. All that I can do here is to point out the most important elusive threads present in the palimpsest that is Fire and Ice. What is the title of the poem? Fire and Ice. What is the name of the poet? Frost. And what is frost but crystals of ice, usually forming a layer when the temperature falls below the freezing point. Robert Frost had a wry sense of humor, and I'm sure that he was aware of the link between the title of the poem and the name of the poet. There is certainly a linkage between Western science and the poem. The main contention of the poem is that the world will end, and that it will end either by burning completely or by freezing completely. Well, this is what mainstream Western science frequently claims. The end of the world has often been predicted by mainstream Western science. Today, we speak of global warming. I think this can be related to fire, to the fire in the poem. We also discuss the Ice Age. This can be related to ice, to the ice in the poem. Fire and Ice certainly alludes to the state of the world between the two world wars. The poem was written shortly after the First World War ended, and it alludes to the very problematic phase that the world was going through. There was widespread social unrest, political turmoil, an economic implosion in the Western world, inspiring Robert Frost to believe that the end of the world was at hand. I may point out that Fire and Ice is not the only poem written at that time, which visualizes a catastrophic collapse, a catastrophic end for the world in general. We have the second coming of WB AIDS, written shortly before Fire and Ice was written, and we have the Hollow Men of T.S. Eliot, written some years after Fire and Ice was written, both of which allude to the state of the world at that time, the state of the world which inspired Robert Frost to write Fire and Ice. The poem continues to resonate in Western culture, in Western literature to this day, as evidenced by the title of George R. Martin's epic fantasy, A Song of Ice and Fire, which forms the basis for the TV production Game of Thrones. The Frost poem also alludes rather lightly to the numerous passages about burning and freezing, about fire and ice, about summer and winter, scattered in the works of William Shakespeare. Some critics hold that the most important allusion present in the poem is to the Divine Comedy of Dante Alighieri. In Canto 32 of Dante's Inferno, the worst offenders are submerged up to their necks in ice, while in a fiery hell. The critics claim that it was this passage which inspired Robert Frost to write the poem under consideration. Let us try to take a close look at the stylistic aspects of the poem. It is a short poem consisting of 9 lines organized in a single stanza. It is not a free verse poem. Robert Frost famously declared that writing free verse is like playing tennis with the nets down. Like any other Frost poem, this poem is also in traditional verse. As I said, it comprises 9 lines put together in a single stanza. The rhyme scheme is A, B, C, B, C, B. The meter used is iamb. It is iambic tetrameter and also iambic dimeter. Tetrameter means the line has 4 feet. Dimeter means the meter is organized in such a way that the line has 2 feet. An iamb is a foot consisting of a short syllable followed by a long syllable. An unstressed syllable succeeded by a stressed syllable. The diction of the poem is simple and beautiful. The lines are short in general and sweet, because you must understand that the poet uses tetrameter and dimeter. We have already discussed the title of the poem, and here I would like to say that the only thing I would like to say that is that the poem has a very appropriate title. The imagery of the poem is striking. There are images from nature, images of burning, images of freezing, images of catastrophe, which leave an indelible impression on the mind of the reader. The opening of line 1 and the opening of line 2 together provide a good example of anaphora. Some say, anaphora is the repetition of words, especially at the beginning of a line. Alliteration is the repetition of consonantal sounds. I hold with those who favor fire. Favor fire is an excellent example of alliteration. Enjambment is the overflow of sense and sound beyond the boundaries of a line or a stanza. We meet with enjambment in the third last line of the poem and the second last line of the poem. The sense and sound overflow from the third last line into the second last line. To say that for destruction eyes is also great. I repeat, to say that for destruction eyes is also great. The poem would not be what it is but for the profound symbolism that is interwoven into its fabric, into the fabric of its text. Fire and ice are not merely fire and ice in a literal sense, but also great symbols. Fire stands for desire, and ice stands for hate. Fire stands for not just desire, for avarice, for greed, for lust, for covetousness. And ice does not stand for just hate, it stands for different kinds of hatred. Class hatred, gender hatred, race hatred, personal hatred, and maybe also the hatred between nations. It is this great symbolism, this profound symbolism, that lifts the poem to extraordinary heights and makes it a remarkable gem of literature, of world literature. What does the poem say? The poem says that the world will end. There are two options for the ending of the world. The first option is fire, the second option is ice. The poet thinks that the first option is the better option. The poet favors fire. But the poet also admits that ice is a close second. It may be a second option, but it's a close second, a very close second. When we read the poem carefully, we realize that it is almost as if fire and ice have been provided with agency. The fire that burns the world to its end, the fire that annihilates the world, does not seem to be an accidental fire. The ice that brings about the end of the world does not seem to be something accidental. It is almost as if the fire and the ice destroy the world as a result of a deliberate choice, as a result of a deliberate effort. As I said, it is as if fire is given agency, ice is given agency. If we accept that interpretation, I think we can identify pathetic fallacy in the poem. Fire and ice provided with agency, acting almost in a human way. Perhaps we could go a step further and say that there is personification in the poem. Fire and ice behaving like human beings. And then we realize that the fire and the ice are not merely fire and ice in a literal sense, but much more than that. Fire stands for desire, and ice stands for hate. And so we will not be wrong to read pathetic fallacy or even personification in the poem. I would like to conclude the class by sharing with you an anecdote linking Robert Frost and the great astronomer Harlow Shapley. The story goes that Harlow Shapley ran into Robert Frost, and Frost asked Shapley, the scientist, the astronomer, how the world would end. Shapley replied that the sun would explode and burn the earth. If the earth escaped that fate, it would freeze in deep space. The next year, Harlow Shapley was astonished to read the poem Fire and Ice in Harper's Magazine. This is one of the favorite This was one of the favorite anecdotes of the astronomer, and he used to narrate it in order to demonstrate how science can influence literature.